Okay, so I'm looking at question 4. Now, according to the Mayo Clinic, normal resting pulse rates for adults are somewhere between 60 and 100. And for well-conditioned adults, they're between 40 and 60. Using this information, explain whether there are any outliers in the scatter plots that are obvious mistakes. And if there are outliers, describe where they are located. So we need to move up now to see the picture and to see what could be candidates for unusual dots.
And then here's the statistical data that correlates with this one.
Right. So in this listed scatter plots, we are looking for people whose data doesn't fit the trend. I'm finding it really hard to see a dot that's got anything particularly bad about it. Yeah, that one's kind of sitting out on its own.
And then
the top right hand
one.
one. And that one is kind of sitting on its own. But sometimes just because you're at the beginning and the end doesn't necessarily mean that you're an outlier. It just means you're very big or very small. But so you've said that there's 2, but they are not giving you those 2 choices, are they? Oh, wait a minute,
No.
do they? No, they're
and
not.
Then I was thinking, rereading the questions a couple times. So it's saying that the normal resting pulse rate for adults range from 60 to 100. So am I then not actually looking at the scatter plot, but looking at the ones that, am I just looking at the resting pulse rates then? And looking at the ones that are before 60 and before or after 100, but there aren't any.
Right, I can't see any. That's why I was a little concerned. So, well, not concerned. So let's say that choice and let's go submit answers and see if there's anything particularly.
I didn't want to just guess my way through it either. I kind of wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't see any obvious ones. That doesn't mean that there might not be one, but there's not an obvious one. Have you hit the submit answer yet? Yeah, you have.
It's taken a second. Oh. Well, I lost my plot.
It is somewhere.
Oh, yep, that's
there we
right.
go. I guess it's a little bit discomforting to have the answer that there is no problem. You almost kind of are looking for problems, and if you can't find one, you kind of force yourself. Like you were picking quite sensibly the one in the bottom left and the one in the top right. The reason that there isn't any, this data is pretty spread out, right? It's not a very tight scatter plot, right? And secondly, it doesn't really extend that much. I'll give you an example of one that would have counted. Can you imagine there was a dot at 95, 60? Now, would you agree that if there was a dot there, that would be, what the heck is that dot doing down there?
Yeah.
That one would have been an outlier. You could get outliers in some other even rarer places. So I'm going to now take control and show you a visual example of other kinds of outliers. Right, let's just say there is the main data. And you had a dot there and a dot there, right? Those little guys there. But they weren't really that exceptional. So that's why the answer was none. Now I said, what about a guy down there? Definite outlier. But you know, you could have a guy here. You see that red dot there? What I try and do is I visualize the data as a sausage. And anything that's outside the sausage is going to be a candidate for being an outlier. Now, if it's really a long way away from that sausage, it's an outlier. If it's kind of a near miss, you know, like a point there, I probably won't make that an outlier, right? If you had a dot way up here, would you agree that is now an outlier because the main data is the sausage, and that's just, even although it's in the same direction as the rest of the data, right? It's in that straight line direction. All the data's here, a big noticeable gap, which is a bit hard to define what is a big noticeable gap, but nonetheless, it's one there. That would be an outlier. If I gave myself a better scale, if there was a dot down there, would you agree that would be an outlier? So an outlier is just any data point that is far away, separated from the main data, the main sausage.
Yeah.
And so
I guess that's kind of why I was looking at, oh, sorry. I guess kind of that's why I was looking at the 2 points, because they did have a chunk of like space between them and the rest of the whole sausage.
Yeah. And that's when a judgment call comes in, which is, yeah, it might have been an outlier, or no, it isn't. Can you imagine that if I put a dot there, it's not, but if I put it there, it is? Isn't there some kind of little grey area where some people would say that gap's big enough to make it an outlier, and other people say, yeah, it's a gap, but you know, you're always going to get gaps. It wasn't that big a gap. And I think this was an example of, yes, there's a gap, but it wasn't that big a gap. It wasn't that severe. And that's why they didn't count it.
It makes sense too, if like the first dot you made that's more further over on the x-axis than the y-axis, that doesn't make any sense, because why would their heart rate be so much higher when they're like stationary than
and then they exercise and it gets better, right? I mean, that common sense would tell you that was a bad combination. Yes. That one there, the person's in real trouble because their heart rate is so high. They shouldn't be exercising in the first place, right? That person there's probably dead. Don't know what that one's telling me, but that one would be someone who's resting is quite good, right? A really nice number in the middle, resting. But when they do exercise, it shoots up. In fact, now I'm thinking about that, that is actually called a stress test. I've had a stress test done in my heart. They plug in the ECG and all that stuff, and they put you in a those things you walk on, right? And
yeah,
they take
it, echocardiogram.
And then they make you do some heavy duty exercise, and they're watching it and that. So that person's probably got a problem in his heart, because as long as he ain't doing anything, it's working fine. But the minute he puts it under strain, whoom, it zooms through the roof. So outliers are very often much more interesting than the normal data is. If you're a doctor, for instance, isn't it the outliers that tend to tell you there's something bad happening? Yeah, if your blood pressure's normal, there's nothing weird going on, right? If it's way out the normal range, if it's an outlier, then there's something going on.
It's funny that you're mentioning the echocardiograms, because it's actually why I'm taking this class, because I'm trying to get into that program.
Oh, so when you look at data for people, they will take this data and you'll find that they separate it into age groups, right? A 70-year-old doing that is not the same as a 17-year-old doing that. And so that the data that they have has been collected, by, experiment, so that they will be able to, I don't know how they'll do it. They may do it graphically. They may just do it as a table, right? For teenagers, this is the normal range. Anything outside here, be worried, those kind of things.
Awesome.